Yep.
I've started
Well,
the
you
recording.
really aged it. We're
Taco
recording.
Bell was there too. So
All right, it's 7 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order. And Mark has already got the roll, so we'll move on to the minutes of August 5th.
Yep, we have six present just for the minutes. We have 6 people present.
Very good, thank you, Mark.
The minutes are on your screen.
Did everybody get a chance to take a look at them? And if they did, could I get a motion?
Motion to accept.
All right, we have a motion to accept. A second,
Second.
and we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who the second was. It was by motion by Jim, right?
Correct.
And who was the second?
Second was Pete.
Okay, Pete, thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, the next item is the Metro Transit route network redesign and implications for Middleton bus service. And Mark, this is a presentation, right?
Yeah, well, a presentation and discussion. We are joined tonight by Mike Chekvala, who I saw, oh, there he is. And he is with Metro Transit, and he put together the presentation, and I've known Mike for many years, and he's done a nice job with this presentation and reaching out to us here to try and be prepared for this meeting. So I'll just turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Can I share my screen here?
Oh, you want to do it that way? Sure.
Is that okay?
That's fine with me.
Okay, thank you.
But I need to give you permission. There you go. You should have permission.
Okay, looks good. Okay, if you have any trouble seeing it, let me know. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Chekvala with the city's transportation department and Metro Transit. We're working with Jarrett Walker and Associates, who's an international transit planning consultant. We're doing a project called the Transit Network Redesign. The background is it's a complete redesign of the system in order to better meet the needs of the Madison area residents and businesses. So it's a complete ground up approach to redesigning the routes and schedules. We have a website there, mymetrobus.com/redesign. If you're not already familiar, mymetrobus.com is our normal Metro Transit website. I also have Daniel Costantino here from Jarrett Walker and Associates. And so he may help me answer questions if there are any. Daniel, do you just want to introduce yourself quick or wave or something?
Sure. Hi, I'm Daniel Costantino. I'm a principal and project manager with Jarrett Walker and Associates. And in my job, I help agencies like Metro Transit and others nationwide kind of figure out what to do when it's time to review where and how often the bus comes.
So why are we redesigning our entire transit system now? There are three main reasons that the way that I understand why we're doing this. One is bus rapid transit. So BRT is going to form the core of our new system. It will replace a lot of the routes through the main corridors in Madison, and so we want to reduce duplication with BRT, but also provide better connections to it and leverage that high capacity transit system and use it to expand those benefits to the rest of Madison and our neighbors, Middleton, Fitchburg, Sun Prairie, and Verona. We also have long-standing issues and discrepancies. People who have to wait a long time for the bus. They say it takes too long to get anywhere. They don't like transferring and so forth. And then finally, a relatively new, although it's becoming sort of normal, is the COVID-19 pandemic. We've reduced transit service by about 20%. And so rather than simply restart those routes that have been put on hold a year and a half ago now, we'd like to come back in a smarter way to put the transit system back together in a way that more represents the needs of the community and the future going forward. So that's kind of a background. This is our bus rapid transit map. So the main BRT route that we're working on now is the red line, the east-west line. That will generally come every 15 minutes. It'll have stations that are a little farther apart than bus stops today. It'll have bus lanes, transit signal priority, stations as opposed to regular bus stops. Most of the stations will be in the middle of the street rather than on the sides. So it'll be a much faster, more convenient and reliable kind of core of the system. The green line will be the next BRT system that we build, which will go north-south, forming that kind of basic grid. With the transit network redesign, we're going to implement both the red line and the green line and the third line, the blue line, which will go out to Middleton and do something. What it does, we'll figure out with the transit network redesign project. But anyway, we're putting in the service and the buses for all 3 BRT lines at the same time in 2023. In 2024, the red line BRT project will be complete, and so we'll have the stations and the bus lanes open in 2024. And then the green line project will follow that a few years later. So the transit network redesign is basically everything besides what's the 3 core routes shown on this map, but it also includes what the BRT lines, the blue and the green lines on this map do outside of the main BRT corridor. So for example, on the north side, we're examining where it will go, on the north side of Madison, on the south side, and then also, of course, in Middleton for the blue line. So backing up a little bit, as we think about what our transit system does for us and what we want it to do for us, there are kind of 2 major goals from a very high level of what our transit system does for us. One goal is the ridership goal. We want to get as many people on the bus as possible. We want to make it attractive and a convenient alternative to driving in other modes. The other goal is the coverage goal. The coverage goal says we want to extend service to as many people as possible, regardless of how high the quality is of that service. So the ridership goal is going to concentrate our service on busier, straighter, more direct routes that will result in higher frequency and a more attractive service that will attract more ridership. Doing things that achieve the coverage goal spreads our resources more thinly across the urban fabric. The result is more routes that operate less frequently. So although we don't have the higher frequency, we're serving more people, but their travel times are longer and they're having to wait more. So fundamental to this project is asking, do we want to serve more of the ridership goal, the coverage goal, or somewhere in between? So we have been doing a lot of outreach in our service area. We've reached out in Madison, but also to basically we're reaching out in Middleton, Fitchburg, Sun Prairie, Verona, basically our entire service area, to ask people where on the spectrum we want to be. We took it to our transportation policy board, which is the Transportation Policy and Planning Board. And we kind of gave them these 4 general places where we could be, ranging from number 1, ridership, definitely, to number 4, coverage, definitely, and then 2 kind of in between, closer to ridership and closer to coverage. What they told us is that they want to be in the ridership mostly category, if anything, leaning towards ridership, definitely. And so that means, again, fewer routes, more frequent service, and more direct service at the cost of some coverage. So I think one of our fundamental questions for you and your community is what should this choice be in Middleton? It could be the same as what we do in Madison. It does not necessarily have to be. It could be more coverage oriented, or I guess, it could be completely ridership as well. So I'm going to give you a little background of Middleton's transit service today, and this may be a review for you, I don't know, but Metro Transit's been providing public transit service in Middleton for as long as I know. Right now, it's Route 70 provides the core transit service during most of the day, weekdays, middays, and evenings, and during peak periods right now. And then we have Route 72 that comes over the top during rush hour to provide more coverage and capacity during rush hour. And then we used to have Route 71 before the pandemic, which provided peak period additional service on the south side of Middleton going into Madison. Route 71 has been suspended since early last year. So this is a frequency map looking at the transit service in Middleton and parts of Madison here. So one of the things we did was we mapped out the service levels by frequency. So if you look at the red line here on Route 10 that has service operating every 15 minutes, the blue lines like routes 2 and 67, this is weekdays midday, have service every 30 minutes. And then these lighter colored brown lines have service every hour, weekday middays. And then the lighter, or is that right? No, the light colored blue lines are hourly service. And then the brown lines are that limited service, the rush hour only service like Route 72. So, one takeaway in Middleton is that compared to the rest of the system, the service is relatively infrequent. You can see it's basically hourly throughout the city in the middle of the day on weekdays. It's circuitous, there's a lot of out of direction travel, and it's complicated. We have a lot of reversing loops. The 70 does this out and back at Ridge Street. And I guess as we have the rush hour overlay service. Before the pandemic, we had the 71 and 72 replacing Route 70, and then on Saturdays, the 78 replacing the 70 as well. So these are some of the things that we'd like to help with. So one of the complicating factors in Middleton is that there are a lot of destinations, a lot of people living in places that are somewhat spread out. The most convenient things for us is if everything was kind of lined up in a straight line. So that's not always the way it is, but that's just the real world. So we have all these destinations and places we try to serve. And the way Route 70 currently does it is it basically just drives out from Madison and just drives around in circles and tries to hit all of them. And so while it does do that, the resulting travel times are very long. You end up with this very circuitous pathway that goes in loops and out and backs and so forth. This is the ridership in Middleton today. So this was before the pandemic. These are the boardings at bus stops. So the larger red dots indicate more daily boardings at the bus stops. You can see that the boardings are somewhat concentrated on the east side of the city, but there are some larger dots in other places. This one larger dot on John Q. Hammonds and Greenway is we do have some transfers there between the 70 series and Route 73. So that is some artificial inflation of the ridership. That some of that is just people transferring from one bus to another. They're not actually traveling to that location. Some of them are. So what are the goals for the transit network redesign, specifically in Middleton? We'd like to fold the Middleton service into the BRT system. To make it more BRT-like, we'd like to make it more frequent and direct. We'll have articulated 60-foot long buses, so the larger buses, and we'll have electric buses on some of the BRT system. We may be able to put electric buses in Middleton. We're looking at different grants that are coming out with the infrastructure bill to do that. We'd like to make the service more simple and more direct, eliminate some of the route deviations and one-way loops. Again, increase frequency to try to get a little more frequent during the day, and allow for future growth. One of the issues, to get a little bit more specific, is the South Ridge service. We go out to serve it and then come back in the middle of the route. We'd like to have that be at the end of the route so that we're not sending people out on that deviation and then have them come back. As it is, there's really no way to extend that service farther up Highway Q as it is. And then finally, maximize efficiency. So what this means is we like to have clock face headways, which means the bus comes every 30 minutes or every 60 minutes rather than every 53 minutes or something. So if we have a bus that comes every 60 minutes, we like to have the total cycle time to be around 60 minutes. So we have one bus on the loop, or 120 minutes, that we have two buses on the loop. If we don't keep efficiency in mind, what we end up with is a bus sitting at the terminal for many minutes, and it's just it's not a good use of money. So looking at the maps here, I'll get into a little more detail as we go along. If we look at Middleton under a pure ridership scenario, this is what we would end up with. This is route F would basically replace routes 70, 71, and 72. Again, we're concentrating the service onto fewer streets so that it can be faster, more direct, and run more frequently. This is just an example, but in this situation, the F would go up Allen, over on Century, down Parmenter, west on University, and then continue down the west side of the Beltline towards Junction Road. And we're planning a new BRT terminal near Junction between Mineral Point and Watts. So it would go down to that new terminal that we're planning on building. So although this route F under a pure coverage scenario would not serve as many places as Route 70 would, it would be relatively more straighter and more direct, and would run every 30 minutes throughout the day rather than hourly. And then there would be some money left in Middleton's transit budget to extend a rush hour route only coming up Park Street branch and up Century to Highway Q. So the lost coverage in this scenario would be in the Middleton Business Park. It would be lost off-peak coverage in the kind of the Central University Avenue area, and then off-peak coverage on Highway Q and Century near the Southridge Loop there. And this would be relatively cost neutral, based on back of the envelope type of calculations, given the service hours that would be in Middleton. So we also looked at a pure coverage scenario. A pure coverage scenario would look probably not too dissimilar from Route 70, the way it operates today. So what we'd like to do is look at if we weren't going to go in a pure ridership direction, with the assumption that we do want to provide some service to these other parts of Middleton that aren't served by this route F here. And so what we'd like to start by doing is looking at kind of families of alternatives. I don't want to get too wrapped up in exactly what street the bus goes on, and this block versus that block. There are a lot of trades. There's a lot of streets that we could. And I think the first thing is to try to look at just our high level options of how we can range the service into one route and two routes, loops, and so forth. We have some families of alternatives that range on that coverage to ridership spectrum. And then we have alternatives that range from cost neutral to a cost increase. So one of these questions of coverage versus ridership, and what do we want to do, and can we do this and can we do that? One of the unavoidable answers is, well, we can always do something with more resources. So we can talk about that. And then, like I said, for now, focus on a high level strategy and look past the details. And for now, and we can work with staff and others to work out the details as we get into the final design of the transit network early next year. Okay. So the first kind of family of alternatives or options is that one that we've seen already. This is Route F, concentrating all the service onto Allen, Century, and coming down Parmenter Street, and then west on to University and down towards the Junction Road corridor. One thing that we looked at, looking at trying to add in some coverage of this route, is that we would be able to do this loop on the west end, which would bring at least part of the Middleton Business Park into it. That would at least give you a couple usable stops on the northwest quadrant here, and we were able to do that within the the time that the bus has to get from one terminal to the other. But that's basically the first option. The second option would be going in a pure coverage scenario that also accomplishes some of the goals of having service that's easier to use, fewer loops, fewer out and backs, fewer deviations, and that is this option. Instead of having one route that does the same thing every time, we could split it into 2 routes. So as the BRT system is coming off of University Avenue from Madison, we could have it split, and some routes go, some buses do the Allen, Century, Parmenter, University corridor, and then some do the second corridor, which would be Park Branch, Century, and ending at Southridge. Now, again, you could arrange these routes on different streets. Again, I at this point, we can talk about that, of course, but just kind of focus on the organization of organizational structure of that different route pattern. So I drew these in green because in the middle of the day, they will be hourly as opposed to every 30 minutes on the blue lines. Of a slight variation of that, which would be kind of half and half, I'd be a little bit more towards the coverage, but it would provide some level of more frequent service, would be this 2A alternative that combines the 2 paths as you're coming into. So the two patterns would do the same thing coming up University Avenue. So you get frequent service up to Century and I'm sorry, not Allen, but what's the other one? Branch. That's right. Yep. So then it would split into two different patterns that would both have hourly service on them. Another family of alternatives would we would do this direct route with service every 30 minutes, not going up to Century, but following the more direct and straight University Avenue corridor. We put this one station into Mendota Street. But basically we go straight across on University Avenue and then down towards the Junction Road corridor. So that would be straighter and more direct. And then to provide coverage within the city of Middleton, we'd provide the second one-way loop route, which would go around and pick up some of the areas of Middleton. And then this would go back to Sheboygan and Eau Claire, where you could connect with the BRT system. So there are a couple issues with this. This pattern would be more expensive. This would have more bus service hours in the city of Middleton. So there'd be a cost increase. And then the other fallout of this alternative is that you would have this large one-way loop. So anybody who's not on a direct path of this would have to go around a long way in a circuitous nature, so they'd end up back where they're going. So for example, if you're going out to the Southridge area there, you would have to, follow this circuitous path out to get there. These transfers to the main blue line would not be able to be convenient. It'd be a 30-minute route transferring to an hourly route. And it's unlikely that we could really, have those coordinated and timed in any realistic fashion. So for those reasons, we're not really recommending from our Metro's perspective, the direct route plus a circulator because of the long travel times, cost increase, and confusing. But we thought we'd put it out there. It is something that technically we could do. There are some good things about it. And this is the last one. Alternative 4 would be basically a different way to organize that same thing. We still have this direct and relatively frequent route going through Middleton, but then instead of a one-way loop, we have a two-way route that goes up towards Century and out towards Highway Q and Southridge and then comes back. And so this has A lot of the same challenges with the first one, but because it's a two-way route, you don't have a lot of the indirection and confusion with the one-way loop. This one is, again, a cost increase. But this is another way to organize service in Middleton. So as we wrap this up here, I think so. What the key questions for us, and hopefully we can find out more today, but we can also think about this a little bit more. Where do we want to be on that ridership versus coverage spectrum in Middleton? Do we want it to be similar to Madison, be leaning more in the ridership direction, or do we want to be somewhere else on that spectrum? Where do we want to be thinking about the main BRT route? Do we want it to be on University, where it's faster and straighter and more direct, or do we want to be on Century, where we can serve more of the things that are in Middleton? And then there's also kind of this triangle of things that we can do, and it's one of these pick two kind of things. So we can maintain coverage, we can be fast and direct, or we can do both, but then we're not cost neutral. So we can kind of pick 2 points on this triangle. I don't know if that graphic is useful or not, but it's just something we were thinking of as we were putting this together. So I don't know, it's a lot. The timeline for this project is we're putting together a draft network basically now, but we still have some time. There are a lot of, this is complicated in Middleton, but it's even more complicated in Madison. So, there's plenty of time to think about this and come up with the right thing to show the public, which we will do in later January. We'll go to our Transportation Policy and Planning Board on January 31st. And then after that, we'll start showing this to the public in February. And then our goal is to kind of work through the iterations of this and ultimately have a plan that's approved and adopted in around April of 2022. That deadline isn't super firm. If it takes longer than that, it'll take longer than that. Ultimately, we'd like to have this new service design on the street by summer of 2023. So probably June of 2023. So that's a long time from now, but there's a lot to do in between in between now and then. So I don't know, I think that's all I have for presentation. We can open it up for discussion. I can answer any questions, however you'd like to go.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, before you go on, I just wanted to note attendance-wise, we have been joined by Ella Donner, who's a new member of the committee, and maybe she can introduce herself briefly. And then also we are joined by Pat Trainer, I believe, is participating by phone. I recognize her number. And we have 5 council members present, including all the members of the Ped Bike Transit Committee.
Okay, very good.
Kate
Thank you.
Miller from the Chamber and Mike Frank from the Chamber are also present. And a dog.
Yeah, sorry about that. Somebody just came home.
Ella, did maybe give Ella a quick chance. Maybe that might be nice.
Yeah, Ella.
Hi, I'm Ella. I'm a junior at Middleton High School, and I mountain bike, and I'm on the cross country team. So, yeah, nice to meet you all.
Hi, Ella. Nice having you. I think you were at our last meeting too, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. Appreciate that. Okay, this was a lot of information, and I'm sure that there are a lot of questions, so I will open it up for anybody who has some questions.
This is Jim. I had a question. You show very heavy ridership along Allen Boulevard and also up at High Ridge. From my experience in riding the bus for 30 years, was that a lot of this was students, college students living in the apartments. Is peak service going to benefit them that much? Or are they also going to need the off-peak service?
I think the general answer to that is that peak only service does not benefit a lot of people. I think that from our perspective, the ridership into the University of Wisconsin is it does peak generally in the normal time frames that people expect it to peak 8 in the morning and 4, 5, 6 in the afternoon, but it's much more varied, regardless of what your class times and what your your work times are. Things happen in your life, and you need to get home at different times. Even if every day you go in at 8 and you come back at 5, there's always this kind of what if scenario in your mind. What if I need to get home in a pinch? And even if there's the service to get home in the middle of the day or late in the evening isn't as frequent or attractive, it's quite daunting and problematic if it's not there at all. So I think we see a lot more value in the all-day service, even if the commute patterns are mostly in the 8 to 5 areas. Daniel has looked at this question a lot in other cities. I don't know if Daniel, you have anything to add.
I think you've said most of it, really. Peak only service, whether they're university students or really, frankly, most markets, peak only service only serves a really limited subset of trips. People who reliably think that they're going to be traveling at certain hours and aren't too worried or have some sort of alternative backup in the middle of the day. And so ultimately, you are at best serving a very small fraction of the people nearby with that. So peak only service is there so that you can, say that you've got a line on a map, and it may relieve a little bit in terms of traffic right at peak hours, particularly around universities, which are actually kind of significantly peaked, despite what we think about student lifestyles, or what many people think about student lifestyles. But yeah, all the other points Mike made are correct and generalizable, like not just in Madison, but in many places.
Susan, you had a question?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One, I'm curious why you're not considering significant transfer points.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's start with that and make sure we don't move on. If you have other questions, we can, I like to take them one at a time. That's my style. So Madison has 4 official transfer points where buses kind of come in, pulse, and then make transfers and then go out. That is a very coverage oriented model. It does provide it provides connections between many infrequent routes. And so as we in Madison move towards a much more ridership oriented system, we end up with just not having all these many low frequency routes that we need to make transfers with each other. So in the ridership map for Madison, you don't see a dozen routes coming in and touching each other and then moving away. You see, two routes cross each other on streets, and the frequency is relatively high, and so there's no real need for a facility and a timed connection like we have at the transfer points. Now we are making some structural changes. The BRT stations on Eau Claire Avenue, or on Sheboygan Avenue at Eau Claire and Seago, that's where the main east-west BRT line and the Middleton BRT line will split off. So that will be not a timed connection, but that will be some level of place where we might have, it would be convenient to end a route. And so in the evening, it's likely that these routes would end there, and then you transfer to the BRT system to get into Madison. We're also building a terminal on Junction Road, just south of Mineral Point Road. And that'll be the ending point for the BRT system, where the BRT buses will stop and charge, but we'll also build some infrastructure where we can have a couple local buses, where we'll have a few bus routes come in and there. But it's more of a convenient place to have a facility where they can come together. It won't be the timed pulse where you have, 8 or more buses coming together at once and going away.
Yeah, I guess what I've always wondered about is why there isn't a bus that comes sort of to the outside of Middleton on University, and then you transfer and there's better connectivity or coverage throughout Middleton.
I guess what would be the, that would be similar to Route 78, I guess, which operates on Saturdays and just does the loop around Middleton, and then you'd have to transfer to go into Madison. I guess the advantage to having it continue into Madison is that people continuing on that service would then not have to transfer, and they wouldn't have to have the delay of an unpredictability of the transfer.
Okay, another question on the BRT route going in from Middleton. You say does it stop at every place every 15 minutes, or how long does it take to get from Middleton to, say, the university?
I don't have the exact time on off the top of my head, but so it will serve local stops past Eau Claire Station, and then it will hit all of these stations going into Madison, but it won't serve any other bus. These will be the only bus stops along the corridor. So it'll follow this path that hit these 5 or 6 stations before it gets to the Capitol building. The current travel time on Route 70 between the Capitol Square and downtown Middleton is about 50 minutes. It's very long. It's almost an hour. I think we can cut that down substantially if we eliminate some of the deviations and have a more direct route. I don't have exact numbers off the top of my head, but I mean, just off the top of my head, it seems like we could, fairly easily get that down to 40 minutes or less, 35 maybe, I don't know, depends on what route it takes.
Yeah.
May I add something, Mike?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. So I just want to say the time difference that you'll get really depends on what you want that bus to do once it arrives in Middleton. There is a little bit of time savings that would be involved just from, the BRT infrastructure and the fewer stations between Capitol Square and Eau Claire. But that's, I think, Mike can correct me, but I think that would maybe be 5 minutes at most. And then what the big time savings really have to do with the fact that this route might come every 30 minutes instead of once an hour like the 70, and might have a path that is straighter and more direct and does fewer loop-de-loops.
Right. Yeah. The pathway into Madison here. We're going to. Shoot, I'm off my. Where did I go? So the pathway into Madison, we're slowing it down by taking it onto Sheboygan Avenue, but then we're speeding it up with the BRT improvements. So that'll be probably about time neutral. But then the real time savings are in Middleton, where we'd like to replace this circuitous loopy route network. The travel time is probably about the same between downtown Middleton and Allen and University as it is today into the rest of Madison. I don't have the schedule at my fingertips, but this is where the real travel time savings potential is. And then if we're talking about travel times, we really need to talk about frequency. So if the bus is coming once an hour, you're waiting anywhere between 1 minute and 60 minutes for the bus. So, even if your travel time is 30, 40 or 50 minutes, probably half of that time is spent just simply waiting for the next scheduled bus to come. And so improving frequency is probably the best thing that we can do to reduce travel times, reducing frequency and improving directness.
Okay,
Hope that helps.
If I may just add that loop that Mike was just talking about, let's call it the neighborhood around the high school. That actually is a fairly recent addition to our transit system, I'd say in the last 5-6 years. And it has never attracted much ridership. We don't have the ridership numbers overlaid here, but just the data shows, and my own observation shows, that we've had very light ridership in that neighborhood. So if that were to go away, people who do ride there within a few blocks of University Avenue, so they could walk south or walk towards Century. I mean, that's not really the biggest distance from Century and University. Is basically the midpoint is where the trail crosses. So there's not people who live there anyway. So that, I don't see that as a loss at all. I think that makes a lot of sense to do away with that part of the system.
mhm. Do you have any surveys of the types of passengers you're picking up? Are they, in terms of where they're working, how many people do we have coming from other areas to Middleton? How many people going from Middleton to, say, the Capitol Square or University?
Yeah, so we do have this data directionally and by time of day. We also do an onboard survey typically every 5 years. The last one we did was in 2015, so it's a bit dated, but so when we do an onboard survey, we ask people things about like where they're coming from, where they're going to, if they're traveling for work, school, or whatever else. I would say that this boarding data, as well as kind of our own observations, are probably almost as good as anything. I would say, based on my knowledge of the system, riding the bus around and looking at the ridership patterns, the lion's share is people living in Middleton, traveling in towards Madison for either school or work, either the UW or working downtown. We do have some reverse commuter. I guess reverse it really depends on your perspective, but going to work or traveling to Middleton when they live in Madison. So there is some of that, but I believe that the lion's share of the flow is people living in Middleton, working in Madison.
This is
Okay.
very anecdotal, but we did do, an online survey when we were having people compare the ridership and coverage alternatives. And I can tell you that in that survey, about 100 people responded and had the zip code 53562, which is most of Middleton. But about 150 people responded that, one of the primary places they go to or come from is Middleton. So that suggests maybe 2/3, 1/3 kind of distribution in terms of people from Middleton versus people coming in.
That's probably about right.
Okay. Are you, and this is a question for going forward, as the university continues to grow, it's running out of places to put parking lots. So there's going to be eventually, and I used to work there, so I'm aware that they're going away. Is there going to be any effort to, I guess, try to attract more people from there? Because certainly riding the bus with what parking fees are there is considerably expensive. Could be a nice alternative. And
Yeah, I mean,
more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is our ridership goal is, so there, if we ask from a very high level, what are we trying to do with all these $500,000 buses that we have floating around that we're paying over $100 an hour to drive around? What are we trying to get out of all that? They're basically two answers. One of them is increase ridership and not pull people, but give people the option to use the bus to travel to work or wherever they're going to. So yeah, that's the ridership goal. The other goal is the coverage goal, which is saying, it's instead of that goal, saying we just want everybody who needs access to the bus to have a bus that drives by their house even if it's once an hour and even if it takes a long time to get anywhere. But yeah, from Metro Transit's perspective, yeah, we'd certainly like to provide a good and viable and attractive option for people to use Metro to come to the university or downtown or wherever they're going.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the northeast side of Middleton, which happens to be where I live in my district, and the South Ridgeway. It seems like as though that, from your graphic showing ridership in Middleton, that seems as though that is probably by far the busiest stop that we have in the city. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Yeah, one of if not one of the busiest. Yep.
And so do you
Marshall
have,
Park,
and Marshall Park, you said?
yeah, Marshall Park is the other big one.
Okay, so you would then have data of when that ridership is for the most part?
Yep.
Because my concern is if you just go the ridership model, and don't, I'm worried about coverage in that area specifically being squeezed. That's a unique area of the city in that we have a lot of affordable housing up in that area. I would imagine that a lot of people are going, and students that are either going to school or to work. So I'm concerned about that segment of the population getting squeezed. And so in your models that you show either ridership or coverage, how would that best be served where that would be, that they wouldn't lose service up there?
Yeah, let me start by saying I completely agree with you. There's a fair amount of lower income, lower rent apartments, multifamily dense housing over there, and so that was one of our chief concerns of reducing service in that area. Going back to one of the first things that you said, the ridership is fairly peaked. In other words, it's a lot of the ridership is in the morning commute and the afternoon commute. I think that also reflects the service that's available to people out there. That's the only time when the service is not once an hour. I also think that although I think these large dots that you're seeing on the east side of the city are largely reflective of the land uses on the east side of the city, they're denser. But I also think it's reflecting the fact that travel times from the downtown and western sides of Middleton to downtown Madison are very long because of the loops and the out and backs and the circuitous nature of the service. So that's just me agreeing with you. To get to your question, it's very difficult to provide a ridership oriented map that serves that South Ridge corner of the city with frequent service. The only way to really do it would be to have to have a system like this where you just have all of the service go out there and end. If you take it as a fact that we don't want to go out and come back as we currently do, this will be the end of the route. And so if that's where your frequent service goes, then that's where it goes. And the rest of Middleton would have to be covered with some other route in some other way. So the ridership map would sort of fundamentally not serve it. I do think that's very, I'm gonna use the word inconvenient. I don't think that's the right word, but I don't think that's, I think that there's a loss in not serving it or serving it only during the peak periods. I don't think that really accomplishes what people will want out of the system. And so I think that's sort of that question is sort of fundamental to us, is how can we achieve some of our goals of making the service better and faster and more direct, and also providing good service to the areas that are currently performing basically without going out and doing the loops and circuitous things that Route 70 currently does. Do you have something to see?
Yeah, if I may add, I think that when you look at the existing ridership data, and this is not to say, the existing ridership data reflects the existing system, right? And so this is not to say that there isn't quite relatively high demand and relatively high need in the Southridge area. I think there clearly is. But I think that the ridership data that you see from the rest of Middleton, from the areas further west, is probably relatively low, not just because of whatever the demographics are, but also because of how the service today operates. Basically, the Southridge area is where you get the best, most direct service to the most places at this time with Route 70 because of the out and back. Whereas anywhere else, you have to basically go around in loops several times before you start going in the direction that you want to be going. And that's kind of why that route in the ridership model is so straight. Because if a route is straight and direct, it takes you to places where you're going to more quickly. So that's just to further explain why that ridership model route doesn't go there, despite the fact that that's where the currently observed ridership is highest.
Yeah, just to reiterate, it could go there, but then it couldn't really go anywhere else.
Right. Or you could have that kind of hybrid option that you showed where the service splits.
Like this one.
Right. And then you could have, basically it's like two routes, but you keep it every 30 minutes for, at least this first mile or so in Middleton. The other thing that I just want to reiterate is that what we're trying to do at this time is not necessarily get the final word for transit in Middleton in the redesign network. We're trying to put a draft network out there for comment. And so I think what we'd like to know is if there's one of these concepts that feels, minus whatever caveats you want to put to it, but that feels on the whole good enough to put out there as a credible idea for what to do. And so maybe that's that ridership concept. Maybe it's the coverage concept that Mike showed before. Maybe it's this hybrid. But that's what we were hoping to get.
Once this plan is put into effect, hopefully there'll be some truthing in it. If you have to make changes, you're willing to make changes, and what would be the frequency of that?
Typically, we make significant service changes once a year in August. In 2023, we're doing it in June simply because the scale of the service change is so large. We want to give people we want to give ourselves a little more time and give people a little bit of time to get used to the new system. We're somewhat driven by the academic calendar. The reason we make major changes in August is so that people can get used to it for a couple of weeks, and then when class starts in September, they they're not surprised that the bus doesn't show up with the same number on it that they're expecting. Technically, there are 4 opportunities a year that we can make changes, and that's based on the driver contracts. There are 4 times a year when they get to choose what work that they'll do, and when we basically need to publish the schedules. So technically there are 4 times a year, but we always like to do it on the one of them that hits in August.
But when you do this redesign, hopefully you're going to evaluate it. If it's not working, you'll make changes.
Yeah, in fact, when we implemented the transfer point system in 1998, if you look at the system maps for the next five or so years after, there were a significant number of changes as they rearranged things slightly to fill in some of the gaps. And it's been somewhat static for the last 10 years or so. So yeah, if as it goes into place, we'll make adjustments as we need to. We'd ideally like to kind of understand the major things and get the plan right as close to correct as we can get it before we put it out. We don't want to shake things up too much too often because to be perfectly straightforward, these are people's lives that we're experimenting on if we're experimenting that way. And so we want to have a system out there that's viewed as robust and reliable and doesn't change too often.
Well, because depending on which way you do it, you're going to have some infrastructure costs too.
There's the infrastructure costs as well. Yeah.
So that makes it more difficult to be tweaking them too often.
So yeah, so the answer is, of course, we can adjust and make changes. We cannot steer and change as quickly as it might seem.
Pat, you had a question?
Yeah, a couple actually. Most of them, you asked the same ones I had, Dan, but a couple other ones I had. Do we need to consider at all where future park and ride lots might be to try and encourage more people to take the bus into Madison?
Yeah, I think in my mind, the best way to plan for park and rides is to understand the service first. People don't just park wherever, parking's relatively easy for people to find. High quality bus service is not as easy to find. So, I think our first goal would be to design the parking design the transit system. And then as we lay out the network, then there may be an opportunity to find opportunities for park and ride. But I don't think we want to look for park and rides and then try to design the system around serving that park and ride.
Okay. And then I think the other question that kind of ties into some of what Dan was asking about the area that has the highest ridership right now. Do we know, and I know I don't think you can answer this, but do we know where most of those riders either want to go or are going? And if we don't continue to provide coverage there, are we really doing a disservice to that part of the community? And I'm thinking it may be employment, it may be, I don't know. I don't know where they're going. Are they going for healthcare? Are they going to go grocery shopping? Is it something that they use so much more because either they don't have access to automobiles or they just like to ride, hopefully they like to ride the bus. And then looking at that, if we try to go with one of these hybrid routes where we look at ridership, but how much, and I think you sort of answered this, but how much of an opportunity do we have in the future to extend that to make sure we're getting the coverage that we need as well? So I guess I'm kind of saying I like the proposals that you have, which are kind of the combination of the two, but I'm kind of asking an unfair question too. If we go with one, and I know it's not the one, but is there one where we can kind of leave our options open to get as much coverage in the future as possible?
Yeah, both are good questions. I'm going to start with the first. So what really drives transit usage is land use. Dense, so people they go from their house to do something. I don't know what normal people do. I know what I do. I normally go to work. I do a couple other things time to time too. But so if we look at the source of trips, we pretty much look at where people live. Higher density areas will tend to produce more transit trips simply because there are more people there, but also because there's a feedback mechanism where denser land uses, where we have denser land uses, we generally put better transit service there. And when we have better transit service, people are more likely to use that better transit service. Lower income areas are also more likely to use transit service because there are people that have less choice. Everybody has some choice in how they get places, but people with lower incomes generally have less choice. and riding the bus is more likely to be something that they choose, whether that service is good or not. And then on the attraction side of the equation, employment is a big one. Schools, the UW, not so much high schools, but larger colleges attract, of course, as we all know, a lot of ridership. And then we also look at kind of spot destinations, larger and low-cost grocery stores. We like to provide access to grocery stores so that people can, feed their families and so forth on without spending money and having choice in what they purchase and so forth. And then just other points of interest or whatever. So that's really what drives transit ridership. And again, looking at the density and the land use is really what drives that. To answer your other question, we've looked at this as well. And so, choosing an option like this, if you wanted to, so this would be relatively budget neutral. If you wanted to look at ways to not be budget neutral, there would be ways for this to grow. This green line could become a blue line, and we could put more service into this line. In this one, this is relatively cost neutral. If you wanted to make this better, you could simply extend this blue line. You can't just do whatever you want. There are some limitations, but we could extend this blue line farther. What we'd like to do is put something in that, as you mentioned, has growth potential in it. And I think most of these do. I think most of these do have growth potential. What we don't want to do is say, this isn't working and we want to put more resources into this transit system, and now we have to disassemble the entire thing and do this whole process again. We'd like to instead put in a system that's adaptable and has the potential for growth. So if you look at the non-cost neutral options, those are also somewhat, there's some concern there because those are not, they can't be scaled down. For example, this route runs once an hour. We really can't run it less than once an hour. So we like the options so all of the cost neutral options essentially can be scaled up. None of the cost increase options can be scaled down.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem.
I had a question, maybe this is more for the city council members. What is the anticipation for the growth? I guess it's the Parmenter Street corridor with the potential with the apartments on by Lisa Lane and then up by Graber. Is there any timeline on when they could be in existence?
Well, the ones along Parmenter are being in construction right now. And I don't, Mark, maybe you can help us with, when is that, I can't remember the name now, the large one coming online?
The aviary.
The aviary is in the process of becoming occupied. There's also the Bruce Company property redevelopment there, which is for Mike's benefit. That's the area where the Bruce Company is located south of Donna Drive. There's a multi-phase, large residential project as a component of redevelopment of those areas, of that area.
There's also the Trotta.
Right, the Trotta is also, that's the apartments on the east side of Parmenter at Lisa Lane, between Lisa Lane and Donna Drive. So yeah, that corridor, the Parmenter corridor is definitely becoming, is one of our highest growth. It actually is our high growth corridor in the city, if you will, for especially for multifamily.
And then won't there be another one up by Graber Road?
Yes.
That's the Bell Farm neighborhood. Yes, there'll be some development there. Not as much multifamily focused. It's a variety of development up there, but yes, there'll be some development there, but not quite the density, I think, that we're seeing along Parmenter.
Mark, there's also the buildings that T-Wall built several years ago of apartment buildings up in Tribeca.
That entire length of Parmenter is fairly dense and is going to be becoming even more dense.
Right. I mean, the ones at Tribeca are starting to be close, you know, that's relatively within walking distance, especially once we reconstruct perimeter with sidewalk, which is obviously very much needed. So Tribeca is still served. Bell Farms, Graber Road would not be as feasibly within walking distance. But it's one of these things where, you know, we're trying to, how much are we able to do to support the ridership model that we have without having it be so circuitous that people don't want to ride it.
Sure.
You know, that's the challenge we have. I really appreciate the options Metro has come up with. I sounded the alarm along with Dan and others about the northeast side not being served. That is our high ridership area. The Allen Boulevard to northeast side is really the heaviest ridership, and it's had consistently good direct service to the University Avenue corridor and campus in particular since the 1980s, at least since the 1980s, back when it was called Route K. I still remember that. So to suddenly have that area not be served, I think is a, you know, that's a big concern. We also know that there's concerns in our business community to the west of Parmenter Street, west of the Beltline. We don't have strong ridership there. We do have geographic coverage for the most part, but as we all know, our employment area is growing significantly out there with thousands of jobs, and it's getting harder to hire people. So I know that there's interest in making sure there still is bus service out there as well. But in terms of existing riders, the northeast side, Allen Boulevard, and where the growth actively is for housing, it's the Parmenter Street corridor, and obviously University Avenue, we're seeing redevelopment there as well.
Thanks, Mark. Kate, you have a question?
I do. So I guess my general question is, you know, Mike, what are you hoping to get as a takeaway from this meeting? Looking at the participants, you know, we're all representing a different segment of the population. I'm looking at the business community. I haven't had a lot of time to dissect these different routes, communicate with the business community to understand, you know, what businesses would be positively or negatively affected by any change. So is this an informational meeting that we're to take back to kind of formulate questions and take those to those people that we represent? Or are you looking for this group to provide you with immediate feedback on the route that we prefer?
So I'm not looking for, we want this route and this will be what we do. I think at the very highest level, I'm looking for a discussion on these kinds of talking points. Do we like the ridership model or the coverage model or somewhere in between? What do we think about this triangle? Do we want to be, assuming that, should we assume that we're cost neutral? If we're assuming that we're cost neutral, do we like the idea of moving a little bit more in the fast and direct to the fast and direct leg of this triangle at the expense of some coverage? I can't really get any more coverage oriented than Route 70 currently is. So I think those are the high levels. Is, do we want to move in that more ridership direction, and to how much? We don't need a solid answer to that, but I think we're kind of looking for some direction. At least, you know, not more than this, or at least this. You know, we kind of like to nudge it a little bit, but not too far. That would be an example answer. If there are some of these concepts that you like or you don't like, I think that would be helpful. Basically, we are going, by we I mean myself, Metro Transit staff, Daniel from Jarrett Walker, will work with staff in Middleton, such like Mark, Abby, Bill Burns, and whoever else, to put together a draft alternative, a draft transit network to show the community and have them react to it. So I think our goal is to at least say that we touched base with you so that we can get any feedback and guidance on how to put that together. You know, anything that we get will be of value. And so that's, anything that you can share with us that will help us do that, I think is basically what we're looking for today. Not any distinct action, not any approval or endorsement of anything in specific, but just sort of any of that guidance that can help us design a draft network that we can show the public.
And I would add that there's that we intend, and Dan, I haven't specifically mentioned this to you, but given our agenda items that we have both tonight and we still have a couple others, I was going to propose that we meet again the last week of January, which would be a few days before the policy committee meeting that Mike has referenced. Robert has his hand up, by the way.
Yep, good idea. Go ahead, Robert. You have a question?
Not so much a question as just saying I would make a push for the group to consider strongly the ridership model, because what we really need is density on the buses. To have buses circle around or move out in a kind of a radial pattern from a central location within Middleton. I think we need to figure out how to get riders to the main bus line, but that bus line cannot be slowed down or we end up with empty buses, which is not good for sustainability to keep this thing going further forward. So I would suggest that ridership be prioritized over coverage, and then the fun part comes, well, how do we also get coverage, maybe with auxiliary systems, other possibilities of getting people to and from the main nodes of the bus line. Just because I'm afraid that if you go too much toward the coverage side of things, you end up having slowed service, which has been discussed here quite a bit. Slowed service means that people find other options, and all of a sudden nobody's riding the bus anymore. And I don't think that's where we want to be. So that's my thoughts, and take them for what they're worth.
Thanks, Robert. Susan?
Yeah, I think Robert said what I was trying to get at to begin with, maybe a little clearer. I know for the whole time I worked at the university, I would have considered riding the bus, but it simply took so long to get there that I couldn't justify it. It would have saved me money, definitely, with not having to pay for parking. So, but it needs to be connectivity or coverage in a way that is really time efficient. And if you're going to have to ride all around Middleton quite a bit before you can start going down University Avenue, that's, I think, discourages a lot of people. And I think there's a lot of people, even in the wealthier neighborhoods, that would ride the bus if it were a little bit more convenient and take less time. And that's what we're also trying to get to in terms of sustainability, is get all these cars off the road.
Thank you, Susan. Well, I agree that the idea of getting more service, getting more people on and sustainability is certainly one of the goals. But I think we really need to be careful, because we need to balance goals. And sustainability is an important goal, but also service for areas that don't have alternatives is an important goal. Yeah. So it has to be balanced. I understand what you're saying, but I cannot, for myself personally, I cannot get behind something that is going to take away service to the point where it's not useful for a segment of the population that needs that service. So I think that it has to be some kind of hybrid between ridership and coverage.
Dan, I agree with you. We can't ignore your part of the city, but we've also got to work on getting Parmenter Street involved. And when you get that distance between the two, the same route is not real feasible.
Dan, may I ask a question?
Please.
it's sort of a question for Mike as well. We've obviously gone through a lot of changes in society in the last year or two with the pandemic and more people working at home, et cetera. We also know that from our travels, you know, I'll speak for myself, from my travels in other communities, bigger cities, it's really awesome to go to a corridor, whether it's train or BRT, and not have to worry what time you got there if you missed a bus, because you know the next one's within 10 minutes, you know, and that's a really powerful, that really helps make me comfortable to take transit because I don't have to worry about a schedule. So that balance of you know, if you miss a bus or a train and you have to wait an hour versus you know, what is my question is, what is the mindset of people nowadays in this pandemic reality, the new reality we have of having less frequent service, but you know the service is going to be there. We have smartphones, we have message boards that tell you where the bus is. What's that relationship now in society between what people expect for frequency of service and punctuality? And if we do the hybrid and have one bus, you know, alternating buses go to the northeast side and then the other go to the northwest, you know, that obviously means less frequent service to each, but you still have the coverage. What's the attitude that people have in this post-pandemic world? Like, sorry for the rambling question, but I hope that makes sense.
That's okay. That's a pretty big question. If anybody figures it out, I'd like to know. But let me take a stab at it. I'm sure Daniel has some opinion. So I think that one of the fallouts is that working from home will be much more viable option for a lot of people. To contradict that, we're actually finding that our rush hour service, our ridership is coming back a lot faster than we thought it would, particularly during the afternoon rush hour. I will also say that you're right that I think people's personal habits and their own their habits that they create, and they're really drawn by experiences. One experience is the one you described, where you go to a big city and you go to a train station and you say, oh, when's the next subway train going to come? And you're like, oh, here it is. And you're like, well, what if I had missed that one? It's like, well, it's in 5 minutes. So, you know, that's an experience that people have. Another experience that we hear about all the time is I thought I read the schedule correctly, and I went and stood on this street corner and I stood and waited and waited and waited, and the bus never came. Why didn't it come? Well, maybe the bus was early. They're not supposed to be early, and we yell at them when they drive early, but sometimes they're early. And if you miss the bus, you're just in the next bus is in an hour. You know, if you read the schedule wrong and you're standing on the wrong side of the street because it's a reversing loop or something, you know, and you're standing and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting and the bus never comes. Those kinds of experiences, they really stay with a person. I mean, it's a quite traumatic experience. I will say that some of the things like real-time information, real-time arrival signs, Google Maps, and all that stuff, online trip planning, it's helped. It helps allay some of that stuff. Hang on, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna. Oh, there it goes. I'm sorry, the TV just went on for no reason. I think the dog sat on the remote. Yeah, so I think all of that stuff helps, but it doesn't change the fact that you still have to figure out where your bus is going to be and when and how to get there and what to do if whatever you've tried to do goes wrong. There's just no, you know, you just know that you have no way to get where you were going to go. So I answered your rambling question with a rambling answer.
Well, and that was well deserved for me. And you still did a nice job answering it. I guess my point is if we're willing to and support a hybrid model, and I'm not sure if that's what the committee's pleasure is, but if we are, is that maybe more palatable to the public, given that we have all these this change in society, as well as smartphones, and so that we have more reliance knowing the bus is going to be there at a certain time. I agree with you that one of the most frustrating things I've seen over the years is people with a very complicated bus service that we have standing on a corner and the bus not coming. That's been very discouraging to see that. And I have on more than one occasion stopped and tried to help somebody who I see sit like they literally have decided to sit down at the stop. They've obviously been there for a while, and maybe they were on the wrong side of the street because they didn't understand our complicated system. So we have a lot of things to balance here. And I'll be quiet now because I've spoken more than I meant to, but I just thank you for your response.
Now, Mike, when we talked about the kind of doing the hybrid or giving you a hybrid as a thought, that was one that you said could be scaled up, right?
I think that's the 2A.
Yes. So any of the cost neutral ones, basically, you can always scale up anything that's cost neutral. What I'm saying is that the ones that if you look in the upper right hand corner, the ones that don't say cost neutral, like this one's added cost, that's fundamentally, it needs that added cost to operate. But any of the ones that are cost neutral can be scaled up. Yes.
May I add two things?
Please.
Okay. In regards to the real-time information thing, I think it's important to understand that real-time information is a convenience, but not a substitute for frequency. Because even when you have real-time information, and even if that information is perfect and you perfectly know how to use it, the fact is that at one point or another, you've decided you need to travel, and if the bus comes once an hour, on average, it's coming 30 minutes later than when you decided to travel, right? And so what the real-time information may allow you to do, if you're in the right place, is hang out at that place for a little while before you go walk out to the bus stop. But you're still not going where you want to go when you want to go. And there are many circumstances where you might not be in a place where you can hang out. Maybe you work somewhere and your shift ends and you really can't hang out there. You got to go and the next bus is in 56 minutes, right? Or maybe you just don't feel safe because it's a pandemic and the place where you have to wait's indoors, right? It's not quite, it's better than not having it, but it's not quite a substitute no matter what. So just wanted to address that point. With that said, I think that the reality is that within the existing budget that Middleton has for transit service, if we make the assumption that that's where we're starting, and that is the assumption that we're making for the purposes of Madison at the moment, so we're not committing the city, the policymakers at the city level to additional spending to start off. If we make that assumption, you can essentially afford, either one 30-minute all-day route or two 60-minute all-day routes, or this kind of in-between thing where you have a 30-minute route that splits to two 60-minute routes. Those are big picture, the three options that are actually available to you. And what is nice about all of them is that they offer less of the looping around that the current Route 71 does. And so what is nice about the ridership one in particular is that it gets you, because it keeps that one 30-minute route, it will connect the most people to the most places in a reasonable amount of time. And the real question is whether the missing the South Ridge area on an all-day basis is kind of acceptable or just plain unacceptable. And if it's just plain unacceptable, then you know that we got to go for 2 or 2A, right? And accept the fact that there will be a lower frequency to maintain that coverage. And I guess at that point, you want to know whether you want to go with the maximum coverage or with this hybrid option.
So is the South Ridge area the area near you, Dan?
Yes, it's South Ridge area is on the corner of Q
Yeah, okay,
And
that's
and,
essential.
and I think yes, for me, it's essential.
I think it's essential for the city. There's,
Katie, I'm sorry, Katie, you had your hand up. Did you have a question?
It wasn't a very good point or a very big point. It's just that when back back a while when we were talking about would you rather have more frequent buses or not? In the pandemic, I would rather have more frequent buses and less density in a bus. That's my only point.
Okay.
I would agree that we need the Southridge area. I mean, how can we say, okay, here is an area that has our densest ridership, but in order to improve speed of the routes, we're going to drop that or make it less frequent. And I don't think we could look at ridership and coverage as mutually exclusive, that we have to put the emphasis on the ridership because those are the people who use the transportation service.
Does anybody else have any questions or any more comments?
I have a question if nobody else does.
Go ahead, Mark.
Mike, under option 2 or 2A, obviously sorry, I don't have the screen. There it is. So specifically option 2A, if you could go to that one, please. Obviously the northeast side is a much shorter segment there than the west side. How would those two operate and still accomplish your objectives of getting buses to the Mineral Point Road, Junction Road intersection?
Okay, so this is a bit complicated. So the way that we have two patterns, one goes from Sheboygan. So I'm going to talk about evenings and weekends, because I think that's a starting point. That's the most difficult. Evenings and weekends, the service will start at Sheboygan Avenue. It will not go all the way into downtown Madison. There will be a transfer to BRT. So the cycle time from Sheboygan Avenue up around this longer pattern to Junction Road Terminal and back is 90 minutes. And so that cannot function at hourly frequencies. Fortunately, the shorter pattern is a 30-minute pattern. So if we combine them and run the two together, it becomes a 120-minute circuit with two buses. And so that functions. So we'll have buses going up and around. One route will go all the way to Junction Terminal, one will not. But because they'll be interlined together, technically speaking, you'll have two buses that alternate one or the other.
That's what I figured.
So if you were living on Southridge and you wanted to go to West Middleton or Junction Road or whatever, technically what you do evenings or weekends is you could just stay on the bus and it'll go down to Sheboygan Avenue and then come back and then go the rest of the way. During weekdays between like 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., it's kind of similar, but it goes all the way to the square. The Capitol Square adds 1 hour to the cycle time, I believe. So they'll function during those times. It'll function more just like two routes. Particularly during peak periods, they don't have that. They don't need to operate at hourly frequencies, so it'll just operate more like two routes, like go all the way to the square and funnel into the BRT system.
And those buses on Bryant Street and University would be 30 minutes apart then?
Yes. So yeah, the way it works is that with that kind of complicated dance, they end up being 30 minutes apart.
Okay, thank you. That helps me understand it much better.
Okay, so at this point, I think what we're looking for is some kind of consensus with the group or a direction with the group as far as which option we're kind of leaning towards. So I'll just throw out that for myself. At this point, for me, 2A is the option that at this point that I'm kind of interested in. Are there any other folks that have a thought on that?
I was looking at 2A also. And could you go to the slide that has the 4 options for ridership or yeah, or coverage? I think there was one with 4 bullet points. Yeah, this one.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, I was looking at the ridership mostly and some lower frequencies to reach a few more places, because I feel like that was kind of the hybrid that lots of people were talking about. And I feel like 2A really showed that.
Thanks, Ella.
I think for me, option 1 and filling the buses is probably my choice at this point, with knowing what I know right now. Starting low, having that peak service going to Southbridge, and then being able to expand from this if we need to. But at least starting with this direct, having direct and frequent routes is my choice.
So Mike, if there's not a consensus in the group, which you should be used to by now.
Oh, I'm used to it.
Is for your next time that you come, can we look at, because I see what Nate's saying, so is there a possibility to look at 2 different scenarios and be able to kind of see how that would work? I think part of the issue that we're all having is this is all pretty high level. And so it's a little hard to get your mind wrapped around what all the repercussions actually would be.
Yeah, I totally understand. Yeah, I think that's possible. I think what we'd like to do is put an alternative out there, and then have people react to it and try to understand it. And then if there is a desire for something different, then look at alternatives. So the problem is this entire thing, if you include Madison and the rest of the system, is just super complex. So we need to kind of start drilling into a design, as opposed to having so many alternatives everywhere. But that's just from a public presentation standpoint. Yeah, when we come back and talk, we can certainly look at these in more detail if we feel like there's some options that we need to compare and contrast. Yeah, we can do that.
Dan, could I ask that
Please.
when you bring the routes back, to put the dots of ridership on so that we can compare them? Because I've got to admit, I like 2A because of the Southridge area, but I like 1 because it goes down Allen Boulevard and there's a lot of apartments, lower income apartments there. So I feel like 2A is missing it. I think that would be real helpful in terms of making a decision.
Yep, and I understand that. We can produce maps like that. We can do that. I also want to say that, I just to get to my original request is to think of these as families or concepts, topologies of transit putting together transit systems. So, could this be on Allen? It absolutely could, rather than Branch. We put it on Branch because then it covers more of the University Avenue corridor. And you could get off at Branch and University and walk at least to Park Street, if not all the way down to downtown Middleton. So we saw value in putting it on Branch. You know, we could also go up Allen and over on Mendota. So there are different ways as we drill down, we can look into those much more specific things as we get into more detail.
Okay, that would be helpful. And if Mark or Abby could give us a location of where some of these apartment buildings are and approximate number of tenants to overlay on it too, could be helpful.
We can do that.
Yeah.
At a very high level, though, I will say that a lot of the apartments on Allen are kind of at either end, right? Either closer to University or closer to Century, and there's a big empty patch in terms of housing in the middle. So
because of the park, right?
Right. So we do kind of get close to most of those by covering University and covering Century.
Right, that was, and I don't want to butt in here, but that was some of our thought process too, is that if you live sort of on the north side of Allen, even Allen towards Century, you would probably find it attractive to just walk the few blocks towards Branch where you could get twice as much service and have the benefit from the frequency. None of this is really from a high level view that far apart. You know, this is all, relatively speaking, walking distance for many people.
And maybe this is Kate.
Thought process between those two.
Mark and Abby, maybe we can get together, but I guess I would like to have a better understanding of the businesses that rely on the routes now, and who will be affected negatively and positively, and give them an opportunity to weigh in as well. Maybe have a listening session with, you know, some business leaders. Obviously, we have a huge workforce issue right now, and I would hate to see businesses who are already struggling to get workforce to lose, you know, people who are relying on the routes now, and at least have some buy-in and be able to look at ways that they could maybe subsidize transportation if they're losing any access.
Okay.
Okay, Mike, any other questions? Susan, is your hand still up or?
No, I forgot to lower it.
Okay, no problem. Have you kind of gotten what you need from us?
I think so. This is helpful.
Okay. I certainly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
And Dan, I had a little bit more to add. I'm just looking for my notes here. Oh, here it is. So Bill Burns and I, thank you, Mike. I don't know if you're leaving, but thank you for coming. And Daniel too, appreciate it. Committee members, I met today, Bill Burns and I met today with Ian, can't remember his last name, in the Department of Transportation, because one of the questions that has been raised is, are there other funding models for transit service? You know, the city, that there are several communities in the area like Stoughton, Verona, Monona, maybe Sun Prairie, I can't remember the fourth one. Yeah, Sun Prairie, that tap directly into state funding assistance for operating transit. And one of the things we learned today is that the DOT is available to work with small cities like ours to supplement or replace, which I don't personally, I'm not advocating that by any means. I don't want that to be construed that way, but to look at other ways to supplement transit beyond the system that is currently in place in the metro area. And so Fitchburg is currently exploring this, is my understanding. Andrew McFadden and the engineering staff there. And the question then is, by January 15th, the DOT said it would be helpful if the city is interested in going down that road to declare or to submit a letter of intent to the DOT to request direct state aid the interest in obtaining direct state aid to pursue additional funding. So if you're interested in that, again, I'm not saying that that's our staff position, but it is an option for you, and I feel compelled to point that out to you, is that if you wanted us to explore other funding options, including receiving state aid directly as a way to extend geographic coverage and funding assistance, that would be something we could pursue as well. So that would be, we would want some sort of indication from the committee if you wanted us to continue to research those options, recognizing that we're still working with Metro Transit as our longstanding partnership.
So this would be a move away from, by going with this funding, this would be a move away from.
I certainly hope it doesn't go in that direction, because I mean, this is me speaking, you know, it's my professional observation, and also having been a transit rider in the 90s. You know, we have a longstanding solid relationship with Metro Transit. And I think if we start operating our own system, especially if it was to replace Metro Transit, then what happens is riders have to transfer from one system to the next. There's increased cost, there's less convenience. You know, I think there's a downside to going our own way. But it is an option that is on the table for consideration.
But this funding could be used for, not to get away from the partnership with Metro, but to maybe subsidized our.
Or to as a way to augment or supplement a core service that Metro operates. I don't know all the details, Dan. It's just something that we could explore further, and rather than getting too far ahead of the committee and policymakers, Bill suggested that I bring this up to you as a way to see if he wanted us to explore this further, possibly leading to a letter of intent. This would come up at your committee of the whole meeting on January 12th, I believe it is. As well. But if committee members here had thoughts on that, about wanting to look at other ways to you know, resolve the or to try and find a way to balance that ridership versus coverage, you know, that would be another, you could give us that direction. Or if you just want us to keep working with Metro Transit and you know, optimistically, you know, maybe option 2A, although one of you preferred option 1. So, you know, we don't know where we're going to end up.
Well, I don't, you know, there's nothing wrong with looking at options, to have you go and look at other options. We're not committed to anything.
Right.
So I would not have a problem with you investigating that more. Does anybody else have an opinion?
I think we should investigate it. I mean, it's always good to know what's going on.
Always good to have more information.
I agree.
Okay.
So if you wanted to direct us to do that, you could make a motion to request that staff investigate other funding options, including the potential for receiving state aid directly to extend geographic coverage and funding assistance while maintaining service frequency, or something like that is what I had written as notes. That could almost be a motion if you wanted it to be, or if it, that was Bill's suggestion anyway.
I will make that motion.
Susan makes the motion. Could I get a second?
Sure,
I'll
I'll
second.
second it.
This is Kate.
Sorry, who seconded?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who seconded.
I think it was me, Katie.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move along here. Let's go to the official map review and discussion. Mark, are you taking that?
Yeah. So the way that the city implements its comprehensive plan is by maintaining an updated current official map. And it's been quite a few years since we've really updated our map. We've had a few changes. A major issue that has surfaced has been the county's acquisition of the former acre farm, which I'm outlining here. You see it on your screen, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. And so originally we had Bellefontaine Boulevard, as a corridor extending northeasterly through the acre property and ending up here at Q. Because of the county's acquisition, we are now proposing that it run along Balzer Road and then south along property lines, shared property lines connecting to Bellefontaine this way. Independently of this decision, if you will, or this recommendation, we are learning from the Mass and Area Transportation Planning Board that traffic modeling indicates that this does not need to be a 4-lane road. So regardless of whether it's a 2-lane or 4-lane road, it's still important to have a route across the north side of Middleton as Middleton grows. So so I wouldn't focus on whether it's 2 or 4 lanes as much as this idea of recommending this realignment. But since you're the Ped Bike Transit Committee, I'm going to focus on the bicycle and pedestrian aspects of this and potential transit service. So what this means is we would have bike accommodations along this route. What you see here is the the trail network. We have an easement on the north side of North Lake that has existed for 25 years since North Lake was developed. Originally, this was extending west along, basically due west with some wiggle around a hill. We are now recommending that this be realigned north to connect with a trailhead that the county is planning at the former driveway entrance to the farm. So that's the main change with the bicycle network. We're also showing it connecting essentially high points. That was something I'm suggesting. You don't see the topography here, but that's why the alignment to the route is shown the way it is to connect high points, which would make good park or public space, public lands features. So that's the main change from a bicycle circulation and pedestrian circulation standpoint. The connectivity here between Whittlesey Road and High Road, we've got a lot of requests to have better pedestrian connections to the Misty Valley neighborhood. I think that was the main issue that I was going to highlight for you. No, nothing else really comes to mind. Oh, and then I sent you a map today. Well, actually, we can get to that at the next item. Are there any questions about the official map and its purpose? I'll just leave it at that.
Were you, is the city going to officially map the 2-lane with bike accommodations and
that would be our
trails,
intent, yeah. And so we're asking the council or the Plan Commission referred this to you and to Public Works Committee and to the Parks Board for your input. There'll have to be a public hearing on the official map, but that's the intent, is to map bike, pedestrian, and the street network, the major street network.
Mark,
Any other
that
questions?
new, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. This is
No,
Pat.
that's okay. Go ahead, Pat. Go ahead.
Mark, the new trail that you have, does it just kind of stop to the west, or does it
Up
have
here,
a future connection? Yeah.
we just didn't know where it would go. This is actually at this point a pretty high point. This is a hill here. Eventually, yeah, I mean, it would make sense for it to connect to the Highway 12 trail. It just stops right now. I mean, this is so far into the future for development that we weren't too worried about that.
Okay.
If you'd like it to continue to show the idea of connecting to Highway 12 bike path, I think that makes a lot of sense. I just didn't put much more thought into it, to be honest.
Okay.
So if you'd like that as a, to show some sort of an idea of a connectivity, that I'm perfectly fine with that. I think that's a good idea.
That works for me.
To extend it?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead and extend it, Mark.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. What I'll do is I'll just overlay an air photo and kind of identify, where the hill, I'll just ballpark it. We can't design it at this stage, but the main point is to show connectivity and expectations to developers.
Okay.
And then also just from a transit standpoint, we don't map transit facilities, but one reason I always look at our official map is, we as we just discussed, we have limited transit service on the north side. And as we grow, maybe there's an option to have a route along the north side of the lake, around the north side of the lake. Highway Q, instead of having these dead ends, it's nice to have, loops. So this type of street grid would allow that. That's all I would say.
All right, thanks, Mark. If there aren't any further discussions, could I get a motion to accept this map
With the change.
with the change? Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Or
make a
I'll move
motion to
that.
accept the map.
I'm sorry, who made the,
I heard
Nate, was that
Pat.
you that made the motion?
I'll second it then.
Okay, I think Pat made the motion and Nate
Yep.
seconded.
Yep.
Is that how it went?
That's what I heard.
Okay,
That sounds fine.
okay. All right. All those in favor say aye.
I,
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, our next agenda item, user conflicts along shared use trail network.
We have had, I know Ken Markert has raised this as a concern, and so maybe we can start with Ken. I do want to note for you that we also have a comment, a series of photos from Middleton resident Annette Napstein about this as well. But since Ken is here, why doesn't he, Dan, it's up to you, obviously, but.
Yes, Ken, please.
Well, it's just the concern that, like older people walking on these trails and the bikes are going pretty fast. It's kind of intimidating, we can't move that fast. And if we do get hit, we're going to get injured pretty bad. And so I just like to see something done to kind of either try to slow down the bike traffic or, something to that effect. But I know quite a few people have mentioned me, they've been kind of intimidated by the speed of the bicycles on some of these trails. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
And so what Annette has mentioned, and this was in your packet, is they have seen some conflicts with some of the, and some specific points in the city, specifically underpass at Airport Road, I know is a concern. Wherever there's corners. So that was she provided us with locations with the signs that we have in place.
Well, the corners and bridges, because with bridges, there's no escape.
Right.
So those are particularly, you can't jump out of the way if you're on a bridge.
I can make this a little larger. I'm sure that's very hard to see. So basically blind curves, near misses. They had a collision. And then she's suggesting is adding larger signage or mirrors to trails and launch some kind of public information campaign to help make these trails paved and unpaved safe for all ages and abilities. So that was her contribution, which Ken sounds similar to what you're talking about.
Mark, every year when we have the bike week.
Yep.
Is there any way that, and I think that we might have done this once before, but is there any way during bike week to have any kind of, I don't know, a public information campaign at that time, like when I know that you've handed out donuts and coffee or something like that, where we can pass along some of this information, because part of this issue is people just not paying attention to what they're doing, not necessarily being good neighbors, if you will. I'm not sure from a city standpoint exactly how we deal with some of these things. Are there other communities that you're aware of, Mark, that have some kind of signage that we don't have, or?
Well, I think ultimately what it gets down to is a public education campaign about trail etiquette and rules of the road, if you will, or rules of the trail. Every user group, it seems, on our transportation network, whether it's bicyclists or joggers or motorists, or pilots for that matter, there's always some people that are more, create more of a noticeable impact than others, that maybe aren't fully focused on what they're doing. So it's not just unique to bicyclists. And ultimately, it's a matter of personal responsibility and how do you legislate, personal responsibility. It's really an educational campaign, I think, Dan, is what you're talking about. Just reminders. You can put all the signs in the world, and that doesn't mean people are going to pay attention to it. So there's not an easy solution here. Sometimes we have, when Penny Klein was here, she had volunteer trail stewards, that had uniforms that tried to provide some education to people. I think it's an ongoing thing. It's just a matter of community awareness and, educating kids in schools. There's bike rodeos that are done at Northside, the various elementary schools to try and help inculcate, is that the word I want? It's an awfully big word for this time of night, to try and instill a training so that you have that mindset as you grow older to respect other users of the transportation. Bike etiquette. Yeah, thank you.
And in my experience, I'll be totally honest, in my experience, it hasn't been kids, it's been adults.
Dan, could I add a couple of other user groups that we need to be aware of? One is the hearing impaired, which makes it difficult because we're training or asking bikers to ring their bell or make noise. But if you're hearing impaired and someone's coming up behind you, you do not hear that. So the training needs to be inclusive of that. Reminders of elderly, just move slowly. And then one that I've always worried about for bikers are the people with dogs on those retractable leashes, and the dog is off over in the conservancy with that leash going across the path, and the biker doesn't see it and rides into it.
Mm-hmm.
So we need a lot of stuff for everybody. And even for pedestrians, sometimes if it's a narrow path, not to walk 2 and 3 people across it.
Yeah. Thanks, Susan. Pat?
Yeah, I was just going to add that this seems to be one where we would need a lot of partners to help to get this to really work. And some of those partners probably are, maybe it's even bike clubs, or maybe it's going to the Capitol Brewery when they have their rides, even though they're mostly on roads. Some of them do ride on the paths to get on different bike rides. And I hope, and I think most of them do want to be safe, and it may be just some reminders like Mark was saying, and some educational things to kind of take advantage of different opportunities where we can hopefully build some partnerships with them and have them do some of the educating as well.
Sure. Okay. So maybe what we
Can I ask
could
what
do,
the city's responsibility
Go
if
ahead,
somebody does get hurt on one of these trails? Like gets hit by a bike or something like that? Is the city responsible since it's
No.
public property?
No,
no, they're not.
Okay. I'm
Thank
just
you.
concerned about liability issues.
no.
Sure.
One of my constituents get badly injured. He ended up having to have, his jaw was broken and his jaw had to be mouth wired shut. And he met with Matt Amundson and was asking if there was anything the city could do. And it was clear answer. We are not responsible for paying any liability.
Is that the recreational immunity concept, Susan?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
what it is.
okay. Yeah. I mean, I think if we are, well, I'm not an expert on this, maybe I shouldn't say it, but I will anyway. I mean, if we're aware of, well, you know what, I don't know enough about it. I'll just say we try to keep our systems, we try to keep our transportation system as safe as possible. And I just don't, I'm not an expert, so I won't comment.
And the city isn't responsible for other people's other people's actions. So maybe what we could do with this is, to Pat's idea, is if anybody has any ideas of groups that we could contact and partner with, if they could send that information to Mark. And then at a later meeting, we could compile that and maybe get some, see if we can get some information put together that they can distribute for us.
And then what about the idea of, signage and mirrors at sharp curves? I mean, is that, Annette, I don't know, yeah, she's not here tonight, but, is that, do you see any, did you want to respond to that at all?
Could it be signage like we have on roads indicating there's a sharp curve coming up? And hopefully they will slow down like hopefully drivers do.
So maybe ask our Parks and Rec staff to consider signage if necessary at some of these locations. I don't even know if there's what signage there is at that location. I didn't travel it before I came here, but I just want to be able to know how to respond.
Yeah, let's get with Matt and see what his thought is on it and what signage that they may have, and take a tour and find out where there would be smart places to place a sign.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, it wasn't really any signage that would have helped because, they were riding to a cross. So
Sure.
just, again, education and staying in your lane or staying on the right side.
I will say as a long time bike commuter and runner on the paths, the things I've noticed the last couple of years is the sharp uptick of e-bikes and just the element of speed and unpredictability they bring. So I don't know, it's nothing to consider now, but it seems like something that'll continue to increase. And the idea of telling people to slow down, I think, is applicable to those e-bikes because one thing I've noticed, you get a lot of people on e-bikes who maybe didn't naturally ride bikes before and aren't sort of used to the momentum and how to handle them.
Sure. Well, as that becomes more of an issue, maybe that becomes a discussion on speed limits at some point and putting speed signs up. Pat, you had your hand up?
Nope, I forgot to take it down.
Oh, that's okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
You got everything you need there, Mark? Can we move on?
That's that helps provide a response, and I'll follow up with Park and Rec staff.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to request for bike lanes along John Q. Hammonds Drive, south of Greenway Boulevard.
I sent you an email late afternoon before the meeting. I'm just trying to find it here. Here it is. I sent you the bicycle network plan from the Madison Area Transportation Planning Board. It would have been good to include this in your packet, but here it is. So can you all see it? You see the map?
Yep.
So we've had a request from a resident to put bike lanes along John Q. Hammonds, this part here. And I have a air photo or a street view image, which I'm trying to slide over and it's not working. Here we go. So this is there we go. So this is in Madison. You see the bike lanes here, and then when you spin around and travel into Middleton, they end. They disappear. So the suggestion is to stripe this in the spring, I would imagine, since I think now winter is coming. And so basically to extend the bike lanes to Greenway, don't mind my driving here, but to extend the bike lanes, it might require removing parking on one side if parking's allowed. I don't remember. Anyway, and then having this be one continuous route for bicyclists, and you see the lanes on this side. So I fully support the idea. It makes sense. Quite frankly, I wasn't aware we had that gap anyway. So
Sure.
that's shown here. So that's just to get your concurrence. What your thoughts are and if you support that idea.
Anyone have any?
Yeah. So basically, the Madison Area Transportation Planning Board has identified this as a need for new or improved on-street facilities, and I totally agree with it.
I would make a motion that we do the striping in the spring.
I second the motion.
All right, very good. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
We'll
Motion
probably,
carried.
so that's a recommendation to the Public Works Committee as well. Is that?
Yes,
what
it
you
is.
intended to
Yeah.
do? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then the next agenda, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Yep. Bicycle accommodations at Center and Allen.
So you all know that intersection leaves a lot to be desired. Trying to remember what I had in the packet now. Oops. The packet has disappeared. There we go. So how best to accommodate bike traffic on northbound Allen, proceeding across Century to Allen and the North Mendota Trail that's under construction. Sean is advocating, our city engineer is advocating that you get the bicyclist should take the lane, northbound through lane, position the bike at the right-hand side of the lane. There may be other ideas. We have a path along the east side of Allen Boulevard, which is does not extend all the way to the intersection, but even if it did extend all the way to the intersection, you still have the issue of trying to cross what is a fairly difficult intersection to cross. It's hard to see this here now. This actually shows the path being all the way to, let me see if I can make this bigger. This shows this path extending all the way to Allen Boulevard, but it actually doesn't. I can navigate there, but you probably all have it in your head. So anyway, I don't have an easy solution here. It's just something that is one of our festering issues in the city. I will say that here we go, Allen Boulevard. Yeah, so here, so the path is it ends in front of Harbor. Almost there. All right, so here's, you can see here how there's a wider bike path and then it just randomly ends. So this ultimately should be extended northward. We also have bike lanes on the street on Allen Boulevard. And one thing I have done just for the benefit of committee members is I have suggested to a property owner who is not receptive to it, I think, but this idea of taking the path around the corner and continuing along Century here. Obviously need to work with Harbor to get and Harbor Wellness to get this permission and Century Harbor condos. But ideally, as a long-term option, it would be nice to go into this when this bridge gets rebuilt at East of Marina Drive, to have this bridge be widened and have the path come in underneath the bridge, come up the other side. That would be an ultimate long-term goal, but obviously that's not something that can be done in the short term. So so that's something that we are now as a new concept. But in the interim, we have this request for enhancements. I don't have any suggestions for you, and I also realize it's 9 o'clock, so maybe this is something we should. Yeah, I just want your guidance for what I should do.
Well, I think this is a little bit more of a subject than we necessarily have time to get into tonight.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be that we defer this item to our next meeting. And Mark, you and I will have some conversations.
Okay. Fair enough.
Could I get
Any
a
reaction to the idea that I mentioned though about going along Century and then underneath?
Mark, that's a good idea if you're going east on Century, but some people could be coming up there and want to go west on Century. And they're going to
That's
want to
true.
just go ahead and cross Century.
That's a good point. Although then what they might do is cross at Maywood Avenue by the Heritage and then go up to Branch Street.
That's
There's other
true.
options.
Yeah.
So, all right, I will discuss this further with staff. We aren't quite ready to sort through this tonight.
So can I get since it's an agenda item, can I get a motion to defer from somebody?
I'll move deferral.
I'll
Could I get a
second.
second?
This is Katie.
Thank you, Katie. All those in favor of deferral, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, that item is deferred. Okay, the next agenda item is trail marking system.
Yes, thank you. This is here at the request of our public works staff, which has been working with EMS. Apparently, there's an effort at the regional level, the county level, to there's interest to adapt a national standard for how to respond, how to put markers at a trail, on a trail network. And this is an example here of second here, where's that flyer? They basically want to know that they're looking for the endorsement of the committee to migrate to a standard that follows this US national grid, it's called. Here it is. Trail markers, and then to adapt this standard regionally, and the region wants to know if the city is interested in that or has any concerns. There wouldn't be any monetary commitment at this time, but basically the idea is to help for first responders, locate people more expediently. So
I would be, I would be all in favor of that.
Yeah,
So would I.
Me too.
Mhm.
I just assumed everyone would be, but they apparently wanted a formal endorsement from the city to proceed with this. So,
all right, will somebody make a motion then to that effect?
I will. This is Katie. I'll move that we endorse this national grid system for emergency vehicles to find people on the bike trails.
I second that motion.
All right, we have a first and a second. Thank you. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
so to endorse adapting a national standard, maybe is that kind of what you're?
Sure. Yes, I stand corrected.
Well, what's not a matter of correcting. I just am suggesting. Well,
Yes.
whatever. Okay.
Yes. Your
Okay.
question is
Thank you.
appropriate.
And then sorry, Dan, anything else?
Yep. Nope. Let's move on to our last item, North Mendota Trail.
So we finally have a bridge that's being installed after months and months of delay. And despite Dan's best efforts to keep this moving along, Dan, I appreciate I'm not on your speed dial for it, but know that we've been working hard to try and get MG&E to work more efficiently to relocate their facilities, and it just took far longer than any of us ever imagined. So fortunately, all the MG&E facilities are out of the way. The bridge footings are being constructed this week. I learned yesterday that they plan to place the bridge on, I think it was December 27th. I was hoping it would be next week, but it's apparently the 27th now is what they're planning. Since the footings are going in, this is, now obviously we do have winter setting in, so it shouldn't be a problem. The contractor said he expects this to be able to be placed before the end of the year. So that's the update on phase 2. We generally, I think we've had positive reaction from the adjoining property owners. Harbor Village worked closely with the trail, with the KL engineering. Also up at Dan, your neighborhood there with the Highland condos. I think they had some concerns initially, but that has really simmered down. So I think we've done right by them. The biggest outstanding issue that I am aware of is some concerns about conflicts at driveways. And so what I'm hoping to propose next spring with your concurrence, and I think you all are on board with this anyway from previous discussions, is that we have a crosswalk standard using the green pavement markings that you see now in Madison and Fitchburg and many other communities. In fact, I just saw them in Canada last week. I was up in Vancouver and they have the same standard there. So it's an international standard now. I really think that would be an effective way to educate not just bicyclists and pedestrians that they are crossing a driveway where there might be more traffic or a street, but also for drivers to know that they're crossing a special side path that has two-way traffic. We don't have a cost, that's not budgeted. I need to develop a plan for that, but it's my hope that we can find some funds to do that at a modest amount next spring. Is everyone basically on board with that? It's not really an action item anyway, it's just discussion, but I just want to let you know. Thinking. Yeah. And then the second part of this agenda item is the east segment. I don't think I put anything in your packet, and I think you can all picture this, but we have received from Dane County, we will be receiving, or the county has agreed to provide $1 million towards the completion of the east segment from Highland Way east to the city limits. If you include the segment between the two Highland Way intersections, I will pull up a map, I guess. Here we go. Sometimes this crashes when I do this, but hopefully it doesn't. Oops. All right, so here we go, here's Highland Way. So this segment here has 17 or 18 houses along it. They are not all on the same page, as Alder Ramsey will tell you, to grant the city permission to take some land to establish a wider path. So our plan at this point is to focus on this segment from here east to the city limits. Let's make this north here. And complete the path to the city limits where the county then will continue the path around the lake. This segment here is estimated to cost just over $1 million for construction. So it's, essentially what the county is willing to contribute. That section is being final designed by KL Engineering, and we should have that done this winter. They are aware now that we suddenly have the means from a budget standpoint to move forward next year. So that's very good news. What it leaves us is a gap between the two Highland Way intersections where we will then, people can follow a narrow sidewalk between the two intersections, or they can travel a parallel road called Cedar Ridge Road. That will be the, I guess the official route. So that's my update for you there.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mark.
Welcome.
Okay, anyone have any comments? If not, we've had a long meeting. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Just in terms of next meeting, Dan, how do people feel about meeting on Thursday, January 27th? Or Wednesday would be an option too, the 26th, but I think since we had good attendance tonight, maybe the 27th is a.
Thursday would be great.
Pardon me?
Thursday would be really good.
Yeah, Thursday generally works for the alders better because there's oftentimes Wednesday meetings too that conflict.
Yes.
What about time of day? This one started later than usual. We typically have met more over the dinner hour. I would like your thoughts on that as well.
I liked 7 o'clock
Okay.
to 9. That was a good time after dinner.
Yep, and that works fine for me. So if
Or 6:30, so it's not quite as late. Is that, how do people
Yeah, that
feel?
works.
It's up to you guys. 6:30. The only person missing tonight was Dana, so I will check with her to see, give her a heads up that that's what you're planning to meet. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
You'll have election of officers at the next meeting too.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, could I get a motion to adjourn then?
This is Jim, I move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Jim. Second?
It's Katie, I'll second.
Thank you, Katie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. This meeting went a little bit longer than our normal, but thank you all for your patience. And we'll see you next month.
And an update,
Thanks.
the Badger women's volleyball team just made it into the finals of the NCAA. Yay.
All right.
Night.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
For sharing that.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Yep, goodbye.
You too.
Bye.